There are several allegorical stories in the Lotus Sutra which illustrate in various ways the principle of skillful means. Sometimes these are taken merely as attempts to justify the apparent emergence of the Mahayana as a schismatic school within Buddhism. Although there undoubtedly is an element of this, the main point of them seems to be rather the relationship between the articulated forms of Buddhist teaching, which are varied, and the ultimate intention of it, which lies beyond or behind those forms. The stories are not very systematically arranged, and they may have been composed at various stages in the compilation of the sutra. One of the most widely known is certainly that of the burning house. It appears in the 3rd chapter of the sutra, following on from the chapter on Skillful Means, which it is intended to illustrate. Of all the chapters in the Lotus Sutra, this one contains the 2nd largest number of occurrences of the term Skillful Means. Since translations of the story of the burning house have now found their way into popular anthologies, and since it is rather verbose when given in full, a very brief summary of the story itself will suffice here. A wealthy old man has a great house with only one door. The house is in a decrepit state, and a fire breaks out, threatening to engulf all the man's children, who are absorbed in play within the house. The old man calls them in vain, then resorts in desperation to skillful means, or feng bian. Knowing the kinds of things which they all like, he calls out that there are goat carts, deer carts, and bullock carts waiting for them outside the door. Upon hearing this, they all come scrambling out of the house and are saved from the flames. The 3 kinds of carts are nowhere to be seen, but instead the old man gives each one a still more splendid chariot, beautifully ornate and drawn by a white bullock. The question is then raised, by way of comment on the story, as to whether the old man was guilty of a falsehood. Sariputra's answer to this is that he was not, but it is not only this judgment which is interesting, but also its justification. The emphasis is put not on the fact that the children received a better vehicle than intended, which might, after all, be taken to cover their failure to receive the specific kinds which were originally promised. Rather, the discrepancy is justified by the fulfillment of the old man's intention to bring them out from the flames. Even if they had not received any cart at all, it would have been inappropriate to speak of a falsehood, because the original thought of the old man was, "I will get my children to escape by a skillful means." Given the above fundamental line of interpretation, the giving of superior chariots equally to all does not appear inconsistent either. On the contrary, it is important because it subverts the distinction between the various kinds of vehicle enumerated in the first instance in order to get the children out of the fire. These were referred to in variety to begin with because the old man knew that to which each of the children is predisposed, and all the various attractive playthings and curiosities to which their natures will joyfully respond. When they all receive the same superior chariot in the end, this underlines the overriding consistency of the old man's actions by contrast with the various inconsistent and ultimately irrelevant interests of the children. After Sariputra's initial answer that the old man is not guilty of falsehood, there follows a longer allegorical explanation of the story. According to this, the old man is the Tathagata, the Buddha. The house is the world, and the children are the inhabitants of the world. These inhabitants are too blinded by their sufferings and by their foolish attachments to be able to be saved from the round of birth and death by a direct exposure to the spiritual power and wisdom of the Tathagata. Hence he makes use of the 3 vehicles, namely the Shravakayana, the Pratyekabuddhayana, and the Buddhayana as a skillful means. These 3 vehicles are identified with the goat cart, the deer cart, and the bullock cart, respectively, and the basic implication is that various paths within Buddhism are distinguished because of varying needs, while all of them have the same fundamental intention and meaning. There is a complication at this point, because the 3rd vehicle is referred to again as the great vehicle, that is, the Mahayana, while one who follows it is a bodhisattva or a mahasattva, that is, an enlightenment being or a great being. At the same time, the vehicle which all receive equally at the end is also called the Mahayana. This may seem at first sight to be polemics in favor of the third vehicle of the three, namely that of the bodhisattvas or mahasattvas as opposed to those of the Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas. However, such an interpretation would fail to take into account that the third vehicle, as a differentiated vehicle, is itself superseded insofar as all three are replaced by the single consistent vehicle. Any polemical interpretation would depend on a continued differentiation between the three. The real intention, despite the equivocal use of the term Mahayana, seems to be to maintain a consistent interpretation which goes beyond polemics. And indeed, this is brought out by the concluding comments in the text. Thus, there is no falsehood in first preaching 3 vehicles to attract all living creatures, and afterward saving by the great vehicle only. It is only because of the inability of the beings to receive the Mahayana teaching directly that the Buddhas, on account of their power of skillful means, in the one Buddha vehicle distinguish and expound the 3. The term Buddha vehicle is used equivocally just as is Mahayana. Sometimes it refers to the third of the 3, as earlier, but sometimes it is not a further differentiated vehicle, neither a third nor a fourth. Rather, it refers in this special sense to that single vehicle which takes over when the differentiated vehicles are seen in their true character as skillful means. This one Buddha vehicle, according to the parallel section in verse, brings bodhisattvas and shravakas alike directly to the throne of enlightenment. Thus, the Buddha vehicle, which transcends the differentiated vehicles, is also radically identified with them. As the verse goes on to say, apart from the skillful means of the Buddha, there is no other vehicle to be found.